In a quiet suburb where the rules are stricter than the speed limits, a retired Navy SEAL did what he was trained to do: protect a life. When 8-year-old Lily darted into the street chasing a ball, Jack Reamer didn't hesitate. He saved her from a speeding car, then built a simple wooden fence to make sure no other child would face the same danger. But what happened next shocked the entire neighborhood. The HOA called it a violation. They demanded the fence be torn down. Fines, legal threats, all because a man chose safety over red tape. What started as one man's act of protection became a national debate over common sense, community, and control. This is the story of the man they tried to silence and the fence that stood stronger than anyone expected. Welcome to Whispering Pines, where a battle for safety took root in one yard and grew into something much bigger. Jack Reamer didn't move to Whispering Pines to start a fight. After 25 years in the Navy SEALs surviving deployments, most men wouldn't believe all he wanted was silence. A small backyard, a sunrise he didn't have to chase in boots. His house was tucked at the end of a winding cul-de-sac where the wind smelled like fresh-cut grass, and the loudest sound most mornings was a neighbor's dog collar jingling during a walk. That peace was the reason he had picked this neighborhood, this town, this life. He rarely attended HOA meetings. He wasn't unfriendly, just private. His idea of community was waving politely, not policing mailbox colors or lawn heights. The rules were strict and sure, but Jack had lived under community structures more rigid than anything a suburban board could dream up. He figured he could live with a few silly guidelines in exchange for quiet mornings and coffee under the oak tree in his yard. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed. Jack had just finished sanding a piece of reclaimed cedar for a neighbor's birdhouse project when he heard the unmistakable screech of tires. His head snapped toward the sound and instincts kicking in before thought could form. He sprinted. Lily Mendoza, the girl from 2 houses down, was chasing a red kickball that had rolled into the street. She didn't see the black sedan coming around the blind corner, but Jack did. The ground blurred beneath him as he ran. He didn't shout. There wasn't time. He reached her just as the bumper of the car kissed the curb. In one motion, he scooped her up and twisted his body, shielding her as they tumbled onto the grass. The car never stopped. It sped off into the turn, gone in seconds. Lily was crying but unhurt. Her scraped knee bled a little, but Jack wiped it gently with the hem of his shirt. Her mother came running, screaming her daughter's name, face pale with terror. Neighbors spilled out of their homes, drawn by the noise. Jack just sat there holding Lily steady and quiet while the world reacted around him. By sunset, his name was on every porch. People came to check on him. They brought peace signs, shook his hand, whispered words like hero and lucky, and thank God you were there. Jack didn't say much. He didn't know how to explain that he hadn't chosen to act. It was simply wired into him. You see a threat, you move. You protect. That's all. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He walked to the corner where the accident nearly happened and stood there for an hour. The bend in the road was too sharp, and drivers treated it like a racetrack. There was no signage, no protection, no barrier. He imagined another child next week, next month, chasing a toy into that same trap. He imagined not being there in time. The next morning, Jack went to the hardware store. He bought pressure-treated posts, metal braces, and 5 panels of solid pine fencing. By evening, he had erected a modest safety fence along the curb. It wasn't tall, just enough to block a running child from darting into the road. He even painted it a warm gray to match the neighborhood's aesthetic. It wasn't beautiful, but it was sturdy, clean, and safe. He didn't ask permission. He didn't think he had to. On Saturday morning, Jack stood beside it, arms crossed, watching Lily ride her scooter near the sidewalk. Her mother waved at him from the porch, eyes filled with unspoken gratitude. For the first time in years, Jack felt something close to peace. But peace in Whispering Pines never lasted long. The envelope arrived on Monday. Thick, cream-colored stationery with the HOA seal stamped in gold. Jack opened it while eating toast, expecting a notice about trash day changes or a community picnic. Instead, it read, "Notice of violation. Unapproved fencing structure. Not in compliance with HOA design regulations. Subject to fine and removal order within 7 business days." Jack read it 3 times. He set the toast down unread and stared at the paper as if it might rewrite itself. There was no mention of the child he saved, no acknowledgement of the safety need, just bureaucratic jargon and a demand. Jack folded the letter and slid it into his drawer. Then he went outside and sat in his rocking chair. He looked at the fence. It stood quietly casting a short shadow in the morning sun. Lily's pink scooter was parked next to it. He wasn't going to take it down. He had seen too much of the world to believe that rules always meant righteousness. He knew what real danger looked like. He had faced it in jungles and deserts. It wore different faces, spoke in different tongues, but it always moved fast. Always demanded readiness. This fence wasn't rebellion, it was responsibility. And Jack Reamer wasn't the kind of man to back down from doing what was right. Not now. Not ever. When he walked back inside, he didn't reach for the phone to argue. He started making a list. People he needed to speak with. Things he needed to prepare. Because Jack had a feeling this wasn't going to end with a letter. It was going to be a war. And he had spent a lifetime preparing for those. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening in the Whispering Pines Community Hall. It was a whitewashed building with neatly trimmed hedges and a sign that read "A Place for Order" beneath the HOA's crest. Jack had never stepped foot in it before. He preferred backyards and quiet spaces. But now his name was on their letterhead, and they were demanding a confrontation. He arrived 5 minutes early in jeans and a black t-shirt. No suit, no tie, just him. A few neighbors greeted him quietly with nods, eyes flicking toward the small crowd already gathering. Word of the incident had spread like wildfire. Jack wasn't the only one who had noticed the blind curve, but he had been the only one to do something about it. Inside rows of folding chairs faced a long table where the HOA board sat like royalty. Carol Whitmore, the president, sat in the center. Her expression was sharp and composed lips painted a severe red. Her pearl necklace gleamed like it had something to say. To her left sat Tom Beasley, the treasurer, and to her right, a woman named Darlene with a clipboard and the permanent smile of someone who never forgot a rule. Carol tapped the mic. This meeting will now come to order. Jack took a seat in the back, arms folded across his chest. The agenda moved slowly. At first, budget, updates, lawn violations, a lengthy debate about garden gnome height limits. Jack waited silent until Carol's voice shifted. Next item, Mr. Jack Reamer has installed an unauthorized fence structure along the southern bend of Birch Hollow Road, she announced, scanning the room as if reading a weather report. This fence violates HOA Regulation 7.4.3 concerning unauthorized modifications to shared visual space. Mr. Reamer, would you care to speak? All eyes turned to Jack. He stood slowly and walked to the front with quiet purpose. He didn't touch the mic. His voice didn't need amplification. There's no sidewalk on that stretch of road, he began. Cars whip around that corner fast. Too fast. Last Thursday, a little girl named Lily almost died chasing her ball. I was there. I caught her. The car didn't even stop. A murmur rippled through the audience. So the next day I built a safety barrier, he continued. I didn't ask for permission because I didn't need to. I saw a problem. I fixed it. Carol raised a hand, her polished nails glinting under the light. Mr. Reamer, while your intentions are noted, this community follows a process. Structures visible from the road must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee. You bypass that process. Jack nodded slowly. Let me ask you something, Carol. How long does that process take? She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Depending on complexity, up to 30 days. Jack turned to face the room. How many of you want to wait 30 days for a rule to catch up to a tragedy? Silence. I'm not just trying to build a shed or a treehouse or a picket fence because I like the color gray, he said. I built something to keep a kid alive. That's it. Tom Beasley leaned into the mic. It's not personal, Jack. We just have rules. I know all about rules, Jack replied, eyes steady. I lived under them for 25 years. But I also know when they stop serving people and start serving themselves. Carol's smile was tight. If everyone did what they thought was right, this community would fall apart. Jack met her gaze. If no one does what's right unless they're allowed to, this community already has. That line stuck. For a long beat, no one said a word. Jack turned and walked back to his seat. Carol cleared her throat. The matter stands. The fence must be removed within 7 business days or legal action will be pursued. That was the end of the official discussion. But the tension in the room had shifted. Jack could feel it. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached him. Some whispered support. Others said nothing, but their eyes said enough. Parents especially were thinking about their own children, about Lily, about the curve in the road. The next morning, Jack's fence was still there, and so was a bright pink sign someone had taped to it. In crayon it read, "Thank you for saving me, Lily." He stood there for a long moment staring at those childlike letters. Then he smiled. The HOA might have rules, but the neighborhood had something stronger. It had people, and Jack had just become their voice. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about who got to decide what mattered most, paper rules or real safety. And Jack wasn't backing down. Not when a child's life was still at risk. Not when common sense had been silenced too long. Not when truth had fences thrown up around it. This fight was just beginning. And Jack Reamer was ready. 2 days passed before Jack heard from the HOA again. This time it wasn't a letter. It was a visit. He was in his garage, oiling the hinges of an old gate he'd salvaged from a nearby farm when the knock came. Sharp, insistent, not neighborly. He opened the door to find a man in a suit and sunglasses standing on the walkway holding a thin leather folder. Behind him stood Carol Whitmore, arms crossed and lips pursed in her signature expression of permanent disapproval. The man extended a card. "Mr. Reamer, my name is Alan Keene. I'm counsel for the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I'm here to deliver a cease and desist." Jack didn't take the card. He just looked at it. Carol spoke up. "Since you failed to comply with the removal order, the board has escalated this matter legally. You are now in violation of the community enforcement policy." Alan tucked the card into the folder and opened it to reveal a crisp packet of documents. "If the fence is not removed by Friday at noon, legal action will proceed. This includes fines of up to $500 per day, liens placed against your property, and further court intervention." Jack wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside. The morning sun caught the corner of the fence, casting long shadows across the grass. Lily's pink crayon sign was still taped to the wood. He looked back at the lawyer, then at Carol. "Did either of you ask why I built it?" he asked. Alan hesitated. "We're not disputing your account, Mr. Reamer, but this is a matter of regulation." Carol added, "Intentions don't exempt people from rules. If we allowed exceptions based on feelings, we'd have chaos." Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know what chaos looks like, Carol?" She blinked, thrown off balance. "It's a mother screaming because her child's body's under a car. It's a kid who never gets to grow up. That's chaos, not a fence, not a patch of wood trying to do the job your board should have done a long time ago." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his words did the work. Alan cleared his throat, placing the documents on the porch bench. "You've been formally notified." They left without another word. Jack didn't move for a long time. He stood there in silence, watching their backs retreat like cowards who had never stood in front of real danger. Later that afternoon, he walked to the corner again. This time, he brought a notebook and a chair. He sat for hours documenting how many cars came around that bend too fast. 12, 13, 14. A few swerved. One nearly hit a trash bin. It wasn't just a bad corner. It was a ticking clock. The next morning, Jack uploaded a video. No music, no edits, just him sitting next to the fence. He told the story. The child, the blind turn, the speeding car, the fence. Then he held up the violation notice and read it out loud. At the end, he said, "This is what they're punishing me for. Not paint color, not noise complaints, for trying to keep a kid alive." He left the video with a simple caption, "Would you tear this down?" It took 6 hours to go viral. By evening, it was shared by a local parenting group, then a veteran support network, a safety advocacy nonprofit. Comments poured in, thousands of them. People called him brave, called the HOA insane, called the fence what it was, a line between senseless rules and human decency. The next morning, there was a knock on his door. This time, it wasn't a lawyer. It was Owen Marks. Jack recognized the young journalist from the Whispering Pines local blog. He had a camera bag slung over one shoulder and a laptop tucked under his arm. His eyes were sharp and full of purpose. "I saw the video," Owen said. "I want to do a story, not a blog post, something big, on the HOA, on the safety issue, on you." Jack studied him for a moment. "Why?" "Because this isn't just about you," Owen said. "It's about all of us. This happens everywhere. Some board gets too much power, hides behind rules, and forgets why they were given that power in the first place. People are tired of it." Jack opened the door wider. "Come in." The interview lasted 2 hours. Owen asked questions carefully but directly. Jack told him everything: the rescue, the meeting, the threats. He showed him the letters, the pink crayon sign, even the notebook of speeding cars. Owen photographed the curve, the fence, the worn patch of grass where Jack had dived to save Lily. By nightfall, the article was live. Title From Battlefield to Backyard. Navy SEAL cited for saving child. It exploded across social media. Local news picked it up the next day. Then regional. Then national. The fence that stood quietly on Birch Hollow Road had become a line in the sand. Carol Whitmore called an emergency HOA meeting. Jack didn't go. He didn't need to, because this wasn't a neighborhood issue anymore. It had become a national conversation, a battle between petty power and common sense. And Jack Reamer, the man who once fought wars in silence, had become the voice of a movement. By Friday morning, the news vans had arrived. 3 of them lined the main road into whispering pines, their long antennas stretching into the sky like modern-day spears. Camera crews angled for shots of the now famous fence. A producer politely asked Jack if he would stand in front of it for a statement. He declined. He didn't build it for cameras. He built it for a child. But Lily's mother, Elena Mendoza, did speak. She stood on her front porch, voice shaking, eyes brimming, as she faced the media. "If Jack hadn't been there, my daughter would be dead," she said. "And now they want to punish him for doing something the board should have done years ago. He didn't break a rule. He protected our kids when no one else would." The footage aired at noon. By dinner, Jack's mailbox was stuffed with handwritten letters, not just from Whispering Pines, but from across the country. A retired firefighter in Ohio, a teacher in Oregon, a mother in Tennessee whose own son was hit by a car in a school zone that never got fixed. Jack sat on his porch that evening, reading the notes in the fading sunlight. One line stuck out. "Thank you for reminding us what it means to be a neighbor." But for all the public support, the HOA wasn't backing down. At exactly noon, a white pickup truck from Pine Ridge Contracting pulled up in front of the fence. 2 men in uniforms got out with tools in hand. Jack stood up, calm but firm. "You're not touching that fence," he said. One of the workers paused. "We were told it was approved for removal." "Approved by who?" Jack asked. The man pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "HOA directive." Carol Whitmore signed it. Jack shook his head. "You don't have a court order. You don't have police backing. You're going to want to get back in your truck." The 2 exchanged glances. One shrugged. "Honestly, man, we don't want to be part of this circus." They left. Jack exhaled slowly and turned to find several neighbors standing nearby watching. Some clapped. Others just nodded. A few stepped forward and began forming a line in front of the fence, unspoken but unmistakable. That night, the footage of residents forming a human shield around the fence went viral. "Stand by," Jack started trending on social media. Whispering Pines had become the epicenter of a debate that touched a nerve across America. How much power should HOAs really have? By Saturday morning, Carol Whitmore was in full panic mode. She released a statement claiming Jack had manipulated the narrative, that the fence was, quote, "an eyesore that set a dangerous precedent for community decay." That same afternoon, Lily painted a rainbow on the fence and added the words "safe place." The press snapped a photo. Carol's quote and Lily's sign ended up side by side on the front page of the local Sunday paper. It was a disaster for the HOA. The public opinion that once favored a tightly controlled neighborhood had shifted towards something more raw, more human. People weren't just defending Jack. They were defending the idea that sometimes doing what's right means not waiting for a permission slip. On Monday, Jack received a formal summons. The HOA had filed a civil complaint in municipal court demanding the immediate removal of the fence and the issuance of fines totaling $3,000. Jack read the paperwork, set it on the table, and picked up his phone. He called an old friend. "Logan, it's Jack," he said. "You still practicing law?" Just enough to annoy judges and ruin someone's week, came the voice on the other end. "I need someone to ruin Carol Whitmore's." Logan Price had been a Navy JAG attorney back in the day. Since retiring, he'd become a defense lawyer in a nearby town with a reputation for dismantling bureaucracy one courtroom at a time. 2 days later, Logan walked into Jack's kitchen with a laptop, a cup of black coffee, and a grin like a wolf. "This HOA thinks it's bigger than it is," Logan said. "But they just stepped on a rake." "What do you need from me?" Jack asked. "Photos, documents, the letter, the video, anything that shows this fence is a direct response to a safety issue." Jack nodded and handed over the folder. Logan flipped through it and whistled. "They're going to regret ever printing this." A court date was set for the following week. In the meantime, Jack's story appeared on a national morning show. An anchor called him the fence veteran. Another guest suggested HOAs nationwide should revise their safety bylaws. But Jack wasn't looking for fame. He just wanted peace. The kind of peace that comes when you know you did what was right, even when the world tried to tell you it wasn't. As the court date approached, the fence remained standing. So did Jack. But this wasn't about wood and nails anymore. It was about principle. And Jack was ready to defend that too. The courtroom was packed. Rows of benches, normally reserved for quiet zoning disputes or traffic appeals, now held parents, veterans, journalists, and even a few local officials trying to stay low profile in the back. The case of Whispering Pines HOA versus Jack Reamer had become more than a neighborhood issue. It was a spectacle, a lightning rod for national attention, and it all centered on one man and one fence. Jack walked in wearing a simple navy blue button-up and khakis, no blazer, no medals. He carried only a folder under his arm in the calm presence of someone who had seen far worse than courtroom posturing. Logan Price walked beside him, confident and unshaken, a file of documents in one hand and a steaming coffee in the other. At the front of the room sat Judge Karen Danvers, known for being methodical and no-nonsense. Her reputation was one of fairness, perhaps the only reason Jack allowed this to go to court rather than settle quietly. He trusted her to see past the papers and into the truth. Carol Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by two HOA board members, and a polished attorney in a pinstripe suit who looked like he'd never laid eyes on a speed bump in his life. Her expression was one of restrained smugness. She thought this would be a formality, a slap on the wrist, a return to the order she believed she controlled. Judge Danvers glanced through the preliminary filings and lifted her eyes to the room. This court is convened to hear the matter of Whispering Pines HOA versus Mr. Jack Reamer regarding a violation of community structural code. Both parties will present arguments regarding the construction and refusal to remove a non-permitted fence. Let's begin with the plaintiffs. Carol's attorney adjusted his jacket and began. Your Honor, the HOA has strict design guidelines reviewed and signed by all residents upon purchase of their homes. These rules are not arbitrary. They exist to maintain uniformity, property value, and community cohesion. Mr. Reamer knowingly constructed a permanent structure without submitting it for review or approval in clear violation of regulations. We request that the court order immediate removal and uphold associated fines. It was textbook HOA language, polished, cold. Then Logan stood. He didn't move behind the podium. He walked slowly in front of the first row, speaking plainly. Your Honor, the fence in question was built not out of rebellion, but out of duty. Jack Reamer, a retired Navy SEAL, saved a child's life when she nearly died at a dangerous curve in this very neighborhood. The next day, he built a modest barrier to protect that corner. Not for himself, for others. That fence is not a violation. It's a symbol of responsibility where the HOA failed to act. He paused and handed the judge a packet. Inside are photographs of the corner footage from a neighbor's security camera showing the near accident, a petition signed by over 120 residents supporting the fence, and testimony from the child's mother. I'd also like to enter into evidence the HOA's complete lack of action regarding safety requests logged over the past 5 years, including 3 separate complaints about that very corner. Carol flinched visibly at that last detail. The judge scanned the page's expression, unreadable. Does the HOA have any response to the safety complaints mentioned? Carol's lawyer stammered. They were considered but not acted on due to budget constraints and prioritization of aesthetic compliance at the time. Logan lifted his brow. So protecting children ranked lower than ensuring garden beds were within the right color scheme. The room shifted. Even the judge blinked slowly at the bluntness. Then came the moment that changed everything. Judge Danvers looked toward the back. Is Elena Mendoza present? Lily's mother stood, hands clutching a folded letter. She walked forward slowly, heels clicking in the silence. She was sworn in, took the stand, and then looking Carol dead in the eyes, she spoke. My daughter would be dead if not for Mr. Reamer, she said. And I don't mean that as a dramatic statement. I mean it literally. He caught her midair. Then instead of posting about it or blaming someone, he fixed the problem. That fence is the only reason I sleep at night. If you take it down and something happens to someone else, you'll never erase that. The courtroom fell into stillness. Then Judge Danvers leaned back in her chair. I have heard enough for a preliminary ruling, she said. It is the opinion of this court that the HOA's enforcement of this regulation in this particular case demonstrates a lack of regard for public safety. Mr. Reamer's actions are not only reasonable, but commendable. The motion to force removal of the fence is denied. Furthermore, all associated fines are nullified. Carol looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Gasps and soft claps broke out before the judge banged her gavel gently. This court is adjourned. Outside, the crowd erupted. Neighbors, journalists, and supporters swarmed Jack, who simply nodded, offered a brief smile, and walked quietly to his truck. Logan clapped him on the back. "You just made case law," Logan said. But Jack wasn't thinking about legal history. He was thinking about how peace had finally come back to that corner of the street. Not through policy, not through paperwork. Through action, through courage, through one man doing what he knew in his gut was right. As he pulled away, he passed Lily and her mother on the sidewalk. Lily waved at him with both arms. The fence stood behind her, untouched. And for the first time in a long time, Jack let himself breathe. In the days that followed the courtroom victory, Whispering Pines changed. Not overnight, not in every way, but something in the neighborhood's quiet rhythm had shifted. Lawn care remained pristine, hedges still trimmed in strict symmetry, but conversations now drifted towards substance, safety, fairness, responsibility. The kind of conversations that had been missing behind the curtain of order. Jack tried to retreat back into his quiet life. He returned to his woodshop, took on a few small projects for neighbors who had once only offered waves. A new birdhouse here, a bench for a retired couple's garden. He even started teaching Lily how to use a hand plane, her small hands barely gripping the tool, but her grin steady with every curl of shaved wood. But the peace he longed for didn't come, because the media wasn't done with him. His story had taken on a life of its own. Veteran groups wanted to honor him. A national HOA reform organization asked him to speak at their summit. Talk shows called, podcasts emailed. Every headline seemed to label him something new. The fence hero, the SEAL who fought the HOA, America's quiet guardian. Jack declined most requests. He hadn't done it to be famous. He had done it because there was a moment, one pure, blinding moment, when a child was in danger and no one else moved. And then a moment after that when the rules of paper and power told him he shouldn't have acted. But he did, and he would again. Still not everyone in Whispering Pines was celebrating. Carol Whitmore may have lost in court, but she hadn't resigned. At least not yet. Her power on the board had cracked but not collapsed. The other members were split, some still loyal, others now quietly questioning her leadership. Carol, however, continued to push forward as though nothing had changed. She appeared at meetings with her usual firmness, tried to enforce smaller violations, trash bins out 5 minutes past collection time, a flagpole an inch too tall, a porch light too bright. It was obvious she was trying to reassert control, and it was failing. People had seen behind the curtain, and once they had, they didn't forget. One afternoon, Jack found a note taped to his front door. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from Tom Beasley, the board treasurer. "Jack, I'm sorry. I've been quiet for too long. You've got more support on the board than you think. Let's talk." That evening, they met on Jack's porch. Tom was nervous, tapping his fingers against a plastic cup of sweet tea. "I always thought Carol was overzealous," Tom admitted, "but I didn't have the spine to stand up to her. Now I think we're ready to change things. Real change. Not just rules, culture." Jack leaned back in his chair. "You've got a lot of folks behind you, but you're going to need more than intention." Tom nodded. "I was hoping you'd help." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You want me on the HOA board?" Tom chuckled. "No, I want you to help pick the people who should be." The plan started quietly. Neighbors began meeting in backyards instead of boardrooms. Discussions weren't about flower bed colors or roof tiles. They were about what mattered: safe sidewalks, real transparency, building a community that protected the vulnerable instead of punishing the brave. Within a month, 3 board members had resigned. 2 new ones were voted in, parents, veterans, longtime residents who had been silent for years but were finally ready to act. Carol fought it. She accused the neighborhood of becoming lawless. She blamed Jack at every turn. But her words didn't hold weight anymore. People had seen what leadership should look like, and it didn't wear pearls and punish fences. It wore calloused hands. It stepped in when no one else would. It built a wall not to divide but to shield. Jack didn't campaign. He didn't speak at rallies or sign petitions. He simply lived his life with integrity, and that alone became the standard others looked to. By the time the next quarterly meeting arrived, the community hall was packed once again. This time not with media, but with residents, ordinary people who had found their voice. Carol sat stiffly at the head table, her nameplate still in front of her. But when the first motion of the evening was announced, a vote of no confidence in the current president, the room didn't hesitate. Hands shot up, one by one, dozens, then nearly all. Carol stood pale and trembling. Her voice faltered. She tried to accuse, to scold, to control, but the room had already moved on. She gathered her papers and walked out. The silence that followed wasn't angry, it was relieved. Jack didn't clap. He didn't need to. He just looked down at the flyer someone had handed him, a new HOA vision statement drafted by the reformed board. At the top it read, "Safety, common sense, respect." It was simple, but it was everything. Spring and whispering pines brought more than blooming dogwoods in the hum of lawnmowers. It brought something new, something the neighborhood hadn't felt in years. Openness. Porch conversations became common. Kids played freely near the corner, where Lily had once nearly died, now protected not only by the sturdy fence Jack had built, but also by freshly installed signage solar lights and a neighborhood-funded speed bump. The city, after all the publicity, finally responded. What Jack had started with 2 hands had grown into a movement. He didn't say much about it. He rarely did. While others celebrated the changes, Jack kept his focus on the quiet things, restoring a swing bench, building a free little library by the park, hosting informal woodshop lessons for teens who had never touched a chisel before. But not everything settled as smoothly. One Saturday morning, Jack noticed a strange silence outside. He stepped out and found that the fence had been vandalized. The word traitor had been spray-painted in black across the middle panel. Lily's crayon drawing was torn. The wood once carefully sealed was now scarred. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he walked back inside, grabbed his toolbox, and returned. Word spread quickly. By the time Jack finished sanding off the last of the paint, a small crowd had gathered. Lily stood with her mother holding a new drawing. A veteran in his 60s brought over a fresh panel of wood. Teenagers who had never spoken to Jack asked if they could help repaint. The fence was restored in under an hour. But something more powerful happened too. People weren't just standing by Jack anymore. They were standing with him. Later that day, Tom Beasley knocked on Jack's door again. "We traced the footage," he said. "Security camera caught Carol. It was her." Jack didn't react. "She snuck in around midnight with a hoodie and gloves. She must have thought no one would notice. Police are already involved." Jack nodded. "I'm not surprised. You want to press charges?" He considered the question for a long time. Only if the community wants accountability. This was never about revenge, just responsibility. Tom understood. The police filed a misdemeanor vandalism charge. Carol's name was removed from all HOA records by vote within 48 hours. She left Whispering Pines not long after. The house she once guarded like a castle was listed quietly by a realtor from out of town. No farewell, no apology, just silence. The kind of silence Jack appreciated. And with her gone, something else happened. The community began to breathe. Regulations were reviewed and rewritten. A new safety committee was formed with real power and public transparency. The HOA stopped functioning like a club and started acting like a service, a group of neighbors for neighbors. Jack refused every invitation to lead it. "I didn't start this to hold a title," he told them. "I just wanted kids to stop dying on corners." Still, the board insisted on honoring him in their own way. During the spring fair, they unveiled a small plaque at the base of the fence. It read, "In gratitude to Jack Raymer, who chose courage over convenience and taught us all to do the same." He didn't attend the ceremony. He was across the street helping a kid hammer together a bat house. But when someone read the words aloud over the microphone, he paused. Then he smiled. That night, Lily taped her 3rd drawing to the new panel. It showed a stick-figure man standing tall next to a wooden wall, arms open wide, a tiny pink figure holding his hand. Above them, she had written, "My hero built more than a fence." And Jack knew then that the real change was never about policies, courtrooms, or meetings. It was about what people chose to protect when no one was watching, and what they stood for when everyone finally was. By early summer, the transformation of Whispering Pines was undeniable. The neighborhood that once prided itself on rigid perfection now pulsed with something far more genuine. Gardens bloomed a little wilder, porches stayed lit a little later, and neighbors who once passed each other in silence now lingered to talk. There were still rules, but they made sense now. They served people, not power. Jack kept to his rhythm. Morning started with coffee and a walk down to the corner past the fence that had once sparked a legal war. He would check the bolts, sand off any splinters, sometimes touch up the paint. It had become more than a structure. It was part of the town's identity now. One afternoon, as he swept up wood shavings from a finished bench project, a silver SUV pulled into his driveway. A woman stepped out sharply, dressed in a navy suit, sunglasses perched in her hair. "Mr. Raymer," she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Allison Grant, producer for American Chronicle. We're doing a segment on community heroes. I was hoping you'd be willing to share your story." Jack wiped his hands, glanced at the van with its satellite dish, and said, You're a few months late. She smiled. Maybe, but some stories are worth telling more than once. He considered it for a moment. Then he shook his head. Tell the story about the girl, the one who still draws pictures and tapes them to a fence. That's who this is really about. Allison nodded respectfully, backing off. But as she returned to her vehicle, Jack caught sight of Lily across the street. She was holding a new drawing. He called out to her. Got something new. She beamed and ran over. This time it was a picture of the fence with hearts around it and the words, "Thank you for making our neighborhood safe." Jack crouched beside her. You know what really makes it safe? She shook her head. People like you, people who care. She smiled, then looked up. Can we make more fences for other places? Jack chuckled. You thinking big now, huh? She nodded. Everywhere should have one. The idea stuck with him. That night, Jack sat at his workbench long after the sun went down. He drew up a plan, a portable version of the same barrier. Easy to assemble, weatherproof with clear instructions. Something parents could install near playgrounds or blind driveways. Something affordable. Something real. By the end of the week, he had built 2 prototypes. The following month, with Tom Beasley's help and some crowdfunding from the community, Jack launched a small initiative, Safe Corners Project. It wasn't flashy, no marketing teams or big launches, just blueprints, kits, and stories from families who had near misses like Lily. Veterans from nearby towns volunteered to help build. Teens looking for summer projects joined in. Local businesses offered supplies at cost. What started as one act of protection on one corner was slowly growing into something that could ripple outward far beyond Whispering Pines. The media came back again, this time for the initiative. Jack let them tell that story. Not for ego, for the kids, and for the countless parents who lay awake at night, wondering if their street corner was the one where something would go horribly wrong. One morning, Jack received a letter from a family in Texas. Their daughter had been saved by one of his kits just 3 weeks after installing it. The corner had been dangerous for years. The city never acted, but the father had found Jack's plans online and built the barrier in a weekend. At the bottom of the letter, scrawled in a child's handwriting, were the words, "I want to grow up, thank you." Jack folded the paper slowly and placed it in a drawer alongside Lily's first drawing. The fight with the HOA had once seemed like a storm, but now looking back, it was clear. It had been a spark, a painful, frustrating, unnecessary spark, but one that lit a fire strong enough to change things. Not just in one neighborhood, but wherever people realized that safety was never something to be regulated out of existence. It was something worth standing up for, worth building for, and sometimes worth fighting for. Jack stepped outside that evening, the breeze warm and soft. He sat in his rocking chair, the one he had sanded smooth after the trial ended, and watched as Lily raced her scooter down the now safe sidewalk laughing. Peace had returned, not because someone gave it, but because someone built it. It was the 4th of July when everything came full circle. Whispering Pines had always held a quiet celebration for Independence Day. A modest picnic on the Greenbelt, a small fireworks show arranged by the city. But this year, the community had something more to celebrate than freedom. They had resilience, unity, and in a strange and humble way, they had Jack. The event began with folding tables lined with homemade pies, lemonade stands run by kids in lawn chairs arranged in loose circles instead of stiff rows. There was no HOA-issued dress code, this time no mandated banner placement or scowling board member checking permit stamps. For once, the celebration belonged to the people. Jack hadn't planned to attend. He didn't do crowds well. Years of combat had wired him to stay on the edges to observe rather than join. But just after sunset, Lily knocked on his door. She was wearing a sparkly red headband with little stars on springs. "Come watch the fireworks with us," she said, "please." He looked down at her and smiled. "All right, let me grab a chair." The two of them walked together down the now famous street corner. A few people clapped when they saw Jack approaching, but no one made a scene. It wasn't about that anymore. It was about presence. And his presence, whether he realized it or not, had already changed how the neighborhood saw itself. As the first fireworks shot into the sky, Jack sat quietly with Lily beside him, her small hands clasped around a sparkler. Her mother, Elena, sat nearby chatting with other parents about the speed bump installation and a new plan to add reflective paint at crosswalks. The conversation had shifted from gossip to action, from pettiness to purpose. After the show, Tom Beasley took the mic for a short speech. He wore a polo shirt and jeans, far from the blazer and binder image he once upheld at HOA meetings. This year, Tom said, we don't just celebrate independence as a country, we celebrate the kind of independence that lets a community stand up for what's right, even when the rules say don't. And we have one man to thank for reminding us of that. He gestured to Jack, who immediately shook his head. But the crowd clapped anyway, not for a hero, for a neighbor. Tom continued, that fence over there wasn't just built to stop a car. It stopped complacency, and it started something much bigger. After the speech, people came to shake Jack's hand. Some just patted his shoulder or nodded with quiet gratitude. A few veterans in the crowd gave him that silent recognition that passes between those who have seen too much and said too little. Then from a table near the snack stand, a boy who looked no older than 10 called out, "Mr. Reamer, are you going to keep building those kits?" Jack looked over. "Yeah," he said, "as long as people need them." "Well, my grandpa wants one for his church parking lot. The cars fly through there all the time." Jack smiled. "Tell your grandpa I'll drop it off myself." The night wore on. The children began to tire. Folding chairs were packed up. Music faded. But long after the crowd dispersed, Jack stayed behind at the corner. He touched the wood of the fence gently, as if checking on an old friend. The grain was still smooth, the paint still fresh, the bolts still tight. But more than that, the reason it stood was stronger than ever. Behind him, someone approached. It was Owen Marks, the journalist. "Thought I might find you here," Owen said. "You heard what the city's planning." Jack turned. "What now?" "They want to name the corner after you." Reamer's turn. "Put up a sign, maybe even a bench with your name on it." Jack shook his head. "Tell them to name it after the kid who lived." Owen smiled. "They already thought of that. It'll be Lily's Corner." Jack let out a quiet laugh. "Now that I can live with." As the last of the smoke from the fireworks drifted into the stars, Jack stood alone for a few more minutes. He thought of the months behind him, the violation letter, the courtroom, the pain on his hands, the faces of neighbors who had once looked through him but now looked to him. He hadn't asked for this, but maybe this was what service looked like now. Not battlefield valor, but neighborhood courage. He turned back toward home. The fence stood behind him, firm and unshaken. And for the first time in his life, Jack Reamer felt like he had finally finished building something that would outlast him. Fall arrived quietly in whispering pines. Leaves shifted to amber and rust, blanketing the sidewalks in soft color. The once sterile cul-de-sac now held signs of life, hand-painted garden stones, a community-built tool shed, even a notice board near the park where neighbors pinned thank you notes, event flyers and drawings from kids. Tidy still, but no longer sterile. Rules still mattered, but they now served people, not restrained them. Jack Reamer spent more time on the move than he had in years. The Safe Corners project had taken off far beyond what he ever imagined. Schools, daycares, churches, even rural bus stops had started requesting kits. Local news stations from across the country had picked up stories of kids protected by the same kind of modest fencing Jack had built on Birch Hollow Road. He didn't take credit. He never did. The kits arrived with no logo, just instructions, a photo of the original fence, and a small quote handwritten at the bottom, "Built with purpose, not permission." But while his name traveled, Jack stayed grounded. He still lived in the same home, still sanded the same workbench, still walked the same loop around the corner each morning. And every now and then he'd pause to check the bolts on the fence. Still tight, still standing. That November, just before Veterans Day, Jack received an invitation from the mayor's office. A citywide safety initiative was being launched thanks in part to the pressure from the public after Jack's story had spread. They wanted him to speak, to cut a ribbon, to stand in front of cameras. He declined. Instead, he sent a letter, brief and handwritten like always. "Let the parents speak. Let the kids run safe. That's victory enough for me." On the morning of the event, while speeches were given across town, Jack was right where he always was at the corner. Lily came riding by on her bike, now older, her helmet a little too big, and her legs just a little too long for the pink scooter she used to ride. She spotted him and hit the brakes. "Want to see something?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a school assignment, a report titled "The Bravest Person I Know." He opened it slowly. It wasn't filled with military stories or news clippings. It talked about the day she ran into the road, the feeling of arms lifting her off the ground, the fence, the drawings, the way Jack taught her how to plane wood and tell stories with her hands. She had written he never called himself a hero, so I did. Jack didn't say a word, but his eyes, usually so steady, softened at the edges. "Can you help me build one?" she asked. like the first one, for my new school. He nodded. Bring your gloves, he said. Later that afternoon, they measured the wood in his garage. Jack showed her how to mark the posts, how to check the grain, how to run a level before setting the foundation. She took each step with care, focused but smiling. The process was slow but deliberate, because what they were building wasn't just a fence anymore. It was a legacy. When the last board was set, Lily stepped back and grinned. You think it'll keep them safe? Jack looked at the structure, then at her. I think you just made the world a little safer already. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the neighborhood, Jack sat on his porch in the fading light. The air was cool, the smell of cedar still clinging to his clothes. Birds settled into the trees as porch lights flickered on one by one. The community he had moved to for silence had become a place full of voices, louder, stronger, more thoughtful than he ever expected. Not because of offense, but because someone one time decided not to wait for permission to do what was right. And when others saw it, they followed. Jack leaned back, eyes on the sky. The world didn't change overnight, but sometimes all it takes is a single act of courage to start turning the tide. A child saved, a neighborhood awakened, a corner no longer feared, and a man once a warrior, now a builder, who proved that some battles are worth fighting, even if the enemy is nothing more than fear wrapped in policy. The fence remained, and so did the story. Quiet, strong, unshaken, just like the man who built it. One crisp morning in late September, Jack Reamer stood at the edge of the park trail behind his neighborhood, sipping his usual cup of black coffee. The air was cooler now, tinged with the scent of pine and the distant promise of winter. He had just finished replacing a loose bolt on the community tool shed when he noticed something odd across the walking path. A small blue tent had been pitched under a cluster of trees half hidden by brush. At first glance, it looked like the kind of makeshift shelter someone might throw up for an overnight hike. But as he stepped closer, he saw the signs. Worn shoes poking out beneath the flap, a pair of battered plastic bags tied to a nearby branch, and a boy no older than 16 huddled inside, arms wrapped around his knees, face pale but defiant. Jack crouched a few feet away, careful not to startle him. The boy didn't run. He just stared, eyes wary. You live out here? Jack asked. The boy nodded once. You eat today? The answer was slower, more reluctant, but honest. No. Jack stood. Come with me. I've got a sandwich and a place to warm up. To his surprise, the boy followed. At Jack's house, the boy sat stiffly on the edge of the porch while Jack handed him a ham sandwich and a bottle of water. He devoured both in minutes. Afterward, Jack gave him space, said little, just let the silence do the talking. Eventually, the boy spoke. His name was Corey. 16, he'd run away from a foster placement 2 towns over. Said the man he lived with hit him sometimes. Said no one ever did anything when he told. He had walked for hours with a half-charged phone and $23 in his pocket. He found the trail by accident and stayed because it was quiet. Jack didn't press him. He just listened. That night, Corey slept on a cot in the garage with a pile of folded blankets and a propane heater nearby. Jack made sure not to lock the door just in case the boys spooked, but in the morning, Corey was still there. And he came back the next night, and the one after. Jack showed him how to work the planer, how to sand with the grain, how to sharpen a blade without chipping it. The boy listened more than he spoke, but his hands were fast learners. Jack gave him chores around the house, paid him a little for his time. Nothing official, just small things to help him feel useful. But Whispering Pines was not a place that looked kindly on the unfamiliar. It didn't take long for rumors to begin. A few neighbors whispered about the teen in Jack's driveway. One even called the HOA anonymously to report a stranger loitering near the park. Tom Beasley gave Jack the heads up before it could escalate. Jack knew he had to act before the wrong people did. The next day, he drove Corey to the County Resource Center. He didn't make promises, but he did vouch for him. Said the boy was skilled. Quiet, needed a break, not a lecture. The caseworker, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, nodded and said they would do what they could. Corey hesitated in the doorway. You gonna forget me? He asked. Jack crouched to eye level. No, you come back when you're ready. This place is still here. You'll always have a corner. 2 weeks passed. Jack thought about the boy often, especially when the wind rustled through the trees behind the trail. He added extra food to his grocery list just in case. Left the cot folded in the corner of the garage. Then one Sunday morning during the new community garden build, Jack heard someone call his name. He turned. There was Corey, backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing a clean shirt and holding a toolkit. They let me into the youth job program, Corey said. Told them about the wood shop. They said I could finish school if I keep working. Jack nodded, eyes steady. They sent me here to clock hours. I figured I'd start with the benches. The community garden had just broken ground. Rows of soil waited for hands. The benches were still raw wood planks. Jack handed him a level. Then let's make them straight, he said. All afternoon, the two worked side by side, the quiet between them easy now. Corey's hands no longer trembled with uncertainty. He moved with purpose. By dusk, they had finished 3 benches. The others from the neighborhood came by surprised to see Corey again, but this time there were no whispers, just nods. Small smiles. Someone handed him a cup of cider. Jack watched from a distance, letting the moment belong to the boy. He had once built a fence to protect a child from a speeding car. Now he had built something else, a space for a runaway to turn around, a path that wasn't closed off but open. And it reminded him once again why he stayed here, why he kept building, not for recognition, but for moments like this, for people who just needed a little shelter, for the ones the world had already tried to forget. That night, Jack turned off the lights in his garage, pulled the cot into a better corner, and smiled as he locked the door. Some fences keep people out. Others show them where home can be. This story reminds us that real impact often begins with small acts of kindness and the courage to help someone when no one else will. In real life, we might not all be Navy SEALs or build fences that make national headlines, but we can pay attention to the quiet needs around us. Whether it's offering a meal, a safe space, or simply listening without judgment, these simple gestures can change the course of someone's life. Don't underestimate the power of your presence. You don't need permission to do what is right. You just need the heart to act. When we choose compassion over comfort, we help build a world that feels a little more like home for someone who needs it.